Hello and welcome to this workshop on creativity and discipleship. For this workshop you may like to have a pen and paper handy to jot down any ideas or doodle if you're a doodler, and to participate in the exercises as we go through, particularly the one at the end if you're inclined to do so. The PowerPoint can be available afterwards, so don't worry about taking notes, and there's a short suggested bibliography on the last slide. So grab a cuppa and let's go. If we were gathered together, I'd do what is affectionately known as the creeping death, going round the room asking you to say a bit about yourselves. Hurrah, you shout, not today. So I shall tell you a bit about me. I'm Reverend Kyla Sorensen. I'm a curate in the Church of England in the Diocese of Norwich. In my previous life, I've been a journalist, a feature writer, a sub-editor and an editor, and I'm also a publisher. I've been a Christian all my life, a cradle Anglican you might say, and in ministry for over 15 years, first as an interfaith minister, and now, God willing, I'm about to be priested in the Church of England at the beginning of August. I'm a graduate of languages. Perhaps you can see a theme. I'm interested in language and how we use words and the spaces between those words to express, such as we can, our relationship with God, ourselves, and each other. Today, we will be mostly focusing on writing as a form of expression and exploration. We will look at reading and writing poetry, song, and creative prose as a way to access our innermost connections, and as an inspiration for our prayer life and search for meaning, and how that can be a vehicle to share that yearning for meaning with others. We'll take a brief look at why poetry, at how imagination can affect our hearts and minds, and how art and creativity, but specifically poetry for the purposes of today, can change and expand our vision. We will consider what discipleship is, and having participated in other excellent seminars earlier this week, you should be able to give that some well-informed thought. We'll consider the importance of poetry and song to discipleship, looking at a psalm, songs, and perhaps poetic writing in the Bible as tools. We will look at poetry as prayer, and using different tools of exploration such as Lectio Divina, meditation and performance. Finally, we'll take just one form of exploration, a guided meditation, to consider how poetry or creative writing in general is personal, and how we can begin to write it for ourselves and to perhaps share it with others. Ah, I hear you cry, but I'm not creative. I've never written anything like poetry before. I don't know where to start, and I don't have time to be creative. Don't worry. In this workshop, we're just going to dip our toe in the water. Hopefully, something of what we talk about today will spark some interest, inspire, and encourage you to have a go. And if you're a seasoned poet or story writer, then we hope that going back to basics will serve as a reminder as to why we do it, why finding time to be creative is important. We're focusing on poetry and creative writing because that's my bag, but most of what we do today can be applied to any form of artistic and creative expression. The aim of this time together today is pretty simple: joy. So let's begin. Why poetry? Let's take a brief look at how imagination can affect our hearts and minds, and how poetry, or any form of artistic expression, can change and expand our vision. Poetry and music are processed in a very similar way by our brains. They both create an emotional response in our brain by triggering activity in the brain's emotional centres. In some scientific studies, brains were analysed whilst being exposed to a variety of stimuli: fiction, poetry, even rule books. They were given MRIs whilst reading the different texts. The results were very interesting. The brains showed marked response on the MRI in the emotional centre when the subjects were reading poetry that they found meaningful, activating the same part of the brain that well-loved and familiar music does. The brains did not show the same level of activity when reading another type of more bland writing, like a phone book. In one particular study, the results demonstrated a certain kind of response that was linked to the brain at rest. that is, the brain during acts of introspection, daydreaming, and so on. Poetry was shown to provide space for self-reflection. We know that music has an effect on our mood. If we listen to relaxing music when we're tense, then it helps to slow down our heartbeat and calm us down. If we listen to fast music when we're driving, it makes us drive faster. Take some time to listen to the background music of a favourite film. You can often feel the tension rising sometime before the action is taken, for example, because the music is building and it holds us in suspense. Buddhist teacher Sogyal Rinpoche was talking at a retreat some years ago about managing our addictive behaviours, and he spoke about many things, but one thing jumped out at me, a seemingly throwaway comment. If certain types of music are suggestive and make you feel like doing things you shouldn't, then the answer is clear. Don't listen to that type of music. A simple instruction, common sense, you think, and that would be right, but in some small way it demonstrates how much of an effect music can have on us. There may be 1,000 different reasons why we respond to music and poetry in the way that we do. Perhaps it's the human love of order and patterns, even if we haven't had any particular teaching about poetry or poetical prose at school. But there is also the fact that some subject matter, style, language, and lyrical form is more appealing to us as individuals. We know what we like. It could be linked to an emotional response we've had when we first encounter a piece, for example. I can remember being in a very busy Indian restaurant many years ago on a large table of friends and family at a celebration. Halfway through the main course, a song came over the music system that stopped me in my tracks. My friends and family carried on eating and talking, but I just had to listen. Something about that song resonated with me so deeply. The minute it was finished, I called over the waiter and I just had to know who it was. It was India Ari, Ready for Love. I found out some time later that she'd written that song for a lover, but realised after she'd written it that she'd actually felt it was some form of prayer. Lyrical and melodic music appeals to me, but the words play the most important part for me. Perhaps because I was brought up on country music, and in that form many songs tell a particular story. I like a song to build. Let's try this. Take a moment to think about a favourite song of yours. You got it in your head? Then think about these things. What is it about the song that grabs you? Is it the melody? Do the lyrics have a special meaning to you? Is the song attached to a certain memory? If so, what is it? Sing a few bars to yourself. Don't worry, we can't hear you. Sing where you can feel where that emotional response is. Just take a moment to recognise where that response is resonating in your body. Finally, think about the subject matter of that song. Is it happy or sad, wistful or provocative? How does it make you feel when you listen to it? If you're not able to think about that right now, that's okay. You can always come back to it at another time. Or, after this workshop, put the song on, dance around the kitchen, and notice briefly where that response is happening. You don't need to engage with it too much, just to get an idea of what's going on. Poetry and music can carry an emotional weight, which is important in our understanding and our reaction to it. But there's also the ability to play with sound and musicality, the pattern, and meaning. With poetry and lyrical writing in particular, we can push at the boundaries of language and deepen our understanding of the breadth of our language. Our brains can enjoy engaging with the trickiness and the complication of the structure, the definitions and interpretations in linguistics. It stimulates the brain. We get excited and inspired. The more we read or listen, then the more our brains will become fluent in understanding meaning and develop an emotional vocabulary that spills out into expression in every aspect of our thinking. Thinking about question 2 in the last exercise, is the song attached to a certain memory? It's interesting to note that in the scientific studies mentioned above, the brain scans showed that poetry stimulated parts of the brain related to autobiographical and personal memory. What does this mean? Perhaps it means that poetry could initialize a sense of personal history or connection, or seemingly create the space to self-reflect in relation to the poem. Let's look at discipleship. What is discipleship? Thinking about everything you've taken part in so far this week, can you put together a brief description of discipleship? Who are we discipling? Others, ourselves, or both? What do you consider to be the key elements of discipleship? Jot down a few words that come to mind. There are many different ways that discipleship is characterized in the Bible, so here are some suggestions for you to reflect on later. Hearing and responding to the call in Matthew 4. Christ-centeredness in Mark 8. Following the teachings of Jesus in John 8. Fruitfulness in John 15. Love for other disciples in John 13. And evangelism in Matthew 28. People have been hearing God's call and responding to it for generations upon generations. We can read it in the Psalms, see examples of it in the Bible passages we've just looked at. Hear Jesus' stories explaining to us what it means to be a disciple. We can also find examples of witness to that call and response in the writings of poets, playwrights, authors of fiction, and in the words and music of songwriters from across the ages. We can find connection with them and their relationship with God and the world, finding similarities that bring us relief and areas of difference that perhaps prompt us to new growth. We can find in their language and expression new and different ways to use language, patterns, and space to step into the mystery. We can imagine their experience and in doing so, find some connection with it to our own. In short, we can learn from their method of expression to help us shape our own. The most important thing is to have fun with it. Give yourself time to trawl the net and find what you like, and then hunt down copies of poetry books in the second-hand bookshops. Build up your collection, as varied as possible. You'll never know when you want to dip in and out of the poems. We are storytellers. As people, we like to gather together and tell each other stories. Stories that explain our existence, our relationships, myth stories, stories of heroism, stories of intrigue. Our need to relate to each other and to the universe around, and our place within it, is expressed through stories. As children, we learn nursery rhymes and read fairy tales, and they encourage our imagination, giving us some of the tools to look beyond ourselves and wonder. In my church, we have a painted ceiling in the chancel, and for our Monday morning story bags group, a mother and toddlers group, we start off our group time together by encouraging the children and parents and carers to look upwards at the ceiling at the gold stars painted there and to sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Do you know it? Then have a go at joining in with me, and don't worry, no one can hear you. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are, up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. Twinkle, twinkle, little star, how I wonder what you are. How I wonder. Our stories, rhymes and songs are meant for us to wonder about the world, to let our imaginations loose and travel with the rhythm and the rhyme to somewhere beyond ourselves. To quote a somewhat overused term in our current pandemic time, we take our hearts and minds on a staycation. It gives us the chance to step out of what is our reality and our norm and expand our thinking to take us somewhere else entirely whilst staying exactly where we are. And like the song, Twinkle Twinkle, we can get to take others with us on that journey. And everyone interprets it in their own way, so you don't have to be afraid of trying something new or different. I deliberately didn't include a picture of the ceiling in the church. My interpretation of the story will look and feel a certain way because I've been in the church singing with the children and their parents and carers. I know the painted ceiling, the feel of the rug we all sit on. I've experienced years of the cacophony of noise that is Monday mornings in the church with about 50 excited children running round and round. The picture in your head will be completely different, and it must be, because even if you were with me every week, you would be interpreting what you see and hear around you very differently. So with today's story and little song, you may or may not have been doing one or any of the following. You may have been remembering when you sang this as a child with your own children. You may have been thinking about the joy of wonder in little children. You may even been able to hear them singing in your imagination. You may have been picturing yourself in your church or church hall as a setting, but using my details to fill in the blanks. You may have been imagining the chaos of 50 little people dashing about and wondering how we fit that many in the space. We have chairs and not pews so we can move the furniture about. You may have been giving thanks that you don't have to write that risk assessment. But whatever you're thinking or imagining, no one of us is the same. But somehow we are all still connected in some way with that story as individuals and as a group. The starting point is the song this time. But where it takes us could be anywhere. Let's take a brief look at one of my favourite Psalms, Psalm 42, verses 1 to 8. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, for the living God. Where can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Saviour and my God. My soul is downcast within me, therefore I will remember you from the land of Jordan, the heights of Hermon, from the Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me. By day the Lord directs his love. At night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life. Take some time to imagine the scene. There is no right or wrong. Don't get caught up with any negative thoughts that you may have about your ability to be imaginative. We've all just gone from singing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star to reading these verses of this beautiful psalm. And as we're doing so, our imagination is creating the scene in our mind as we read the words. So pick up your pen and paper and jot down some of the images you see as I read the 8 verses again, but this time much more slowly. Let your mind follow the words and write down anything that jumps out at you, a phrase, a word, or an image. As the deer pants for streams of water, so my soul pants for you, my God. My soul thirsts for God, the living God. Where can I go and meet with God? My tears have been my food day and night, while people say to me all day long, where is your God? These things I remember as I pour out my soul. How I used to go to the house of God under the protection of the Mighty One, with shouts of joy and praise among the festive throng. Why, my soul, are you downcast? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God, for I will yet praise him, my Saviour and my God. My soul is downcast within me, therefore I will remember you from the land of Jordan, the heights of Hermon, from Mount Mizar. Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls. All your waves and breakers have swept over me. By day the Lord directs his love, at night his song is with me, a prayer to the God of my life. Now spend a little time letting that phrase or word or image that came to you become clearer. What's it saying? How does it relate to what's going on for you today? What connection do you feel or not feel to it? Where does that connection manifest itself? Or what does that disconnection feel like to you? Poetry as prayer, devotional poetry. The sweet dark night. O love unfathomable, into thy deep depths I plunge my soul, losing all sight, all consciousness, and yet unconscious, conscious that the dark surrounding, holding and enfolding me, and penetrating every part of me, is love's essential presence, blessing me. O sweetest darkness, sweetest loneliness, darkness because no form can image thee, loneliness because I am within. Thy love and no apparent sense can give my sense consciousness of that which is beyond the sense ignorance. Great Lord and Lover, lo, I yield my soul to the sweet tyranny of thine o'ermasting grace, so to be born self-yielding by thy will, the happy captive of thy conquering love. Father Andrew, SDC, from Love's Pilgrimage and Other Poems. Devotional poetry can be a glorious way to find some space and connection without a structured prayer. If you find prayer particularly difficult at times, and let's face it, we all have dry times, we're only human, then a handy book of devotional poetry can help us to feel connected and engaged on every level, without adding the extra pressure of, I should be praying like this. It can give us the chance to spend a little time and just dive in. I encourage you to explore some devotional poetry, such as that poem by Father Andrew, among others on the bibliography at the end of this presentation, and just to have a couple of books handy on the shelf. The beauty of poetry is that it can be dipped into and out of as you have time. No pressure. And it may provoke certain thoughts and feelings and prompt some deeper thinking throughout the day, or it might not. It may be the opportunity for you to sit with it over a cuppa and just give yourself a little time, however long you have, and just experience it. And then put it back on the shelf when the cuppa is finished or the next Zoom meeting begins. It's a simple pleasure, particularly when you find a poet or writer whose way of writing really resonates with you. And so, like we talked about at the beginning of this session together, your brain and your body will easily relax into it when you're more familiar, and it will activate the emotion centers of your brain more quickly, allowing you to access that connection more easily. It may help us to find words or images for prayer, because we're expanding our emotional vocabulary without even having to work at it. We can use the practice of Lectio Divina, for example, to read the piece of poetry or prose very, very slowly and allow something to come forward, a word or a phrase, and then allow that to become the focus of our thoughts and prayers. And when we know that there's something that works, that really works for us, something that excites us, we have to share it with others. We just can't help ourselves. We are storytellers after all. And so we can share our newfound resources and imaginative toolbox with others. Like the first time I found a little battered book written by a certain Father Andrew SDC in 1931, and the first page I turned to described the use of incense in church in such an exquisite way I was just spellbound. I had to send it to my friends. Have you read this? Have you read this? Isn't it beautiful? Or the first time I read Sue Monk Kidd's book, The Secret Life of Bees, and the descriptions were so detailed and inspiring that at one point I could actually taste honey on my tongue when I was reading. I've had to share that book pretty much weekly since I first read it in about 2008. And I'm sharing it with you today. It's in the bibliography. There are many modern day poets. Today we're going to look at a poem by R.S. Thomas called The Coming. And God held in his hand a small globe. Look, he said. The sun looked. Far off, as through water, he saw a scorched land of fierce colour. The light burned there. Crusted buildings cast their shadows. A bright serpent, a river, uncoiled itself, radiant with slime. On a bare hill, a bare tree saddened by the sky. Many people held out their thin arms to it, as though waiting for a vanished April to return to its crossed boughs. The sun watched them. Let me go there, he said. What do you think it was about? What are the relationships in this poem? Take a moment to draw a diagram, if you can, of the relationships that you see. Where in time is this taking place? What parts of the language do you like in the poem? Are there any parts that feel discordant? Why? What emotions are you feeling? How does that poem relate to you and your ministry? So this is all very well, I hear you say, but this isn't an English lit class. So what different ways can we explore poetry or prose as a tool for discipleship? What methods are there out there that we can use for ourselves or helping others to delve into the depths of our desire for connectedness? Well, throughout this webinar, we've been using various different techniques to explore our connection to poetry and how it resonates with us. We've been using very simple meditative and reflective methods. We've looked at Lectio Divina as a really simple and very effective tool in the toolbox to help us focus, and not just in the dry times. It can be included at any time in our spiritual practice. It's a way to engage with the text differently, more reflectively, and not just poetry, but any kind of text. But poetry is not something that is just meant to be read quietly to ourselves. It's also meant to be read out loud or performed like a song. And that experience is very different to the quiet time spent reading a favourite piece whilst curled up on the sofa with a cuppa. Not only that, speaking poetry out loud, particularly if it's a favourite piece you know well, can be a great way to develop your public speaking skills, whether you're new to it or have been doing it for years. Choose a poem and have a go. Think about if you were hearing it read by someone else. What would you like it to sound like? What are the important parts? Underline the key words or the words that you think are important and feel into how to best express them. And just give it a try. Find a small group of friends or parishioners, tell them a little bit about why this particular piece is a favourite, and then let them hear it when you're reading it out loud. It will sound very different, trust me, and you may discover another layer of meaning or notice a little comma or break in the metre that you'd never paid attention to before. You can even find these subtle differences if you read the poem out loud to yourself. Finally, we're going to look at poetry as expression. Most of us will have been encouraged to journal as a form of reflection and spiritual practice, increasing our self-awareness and our ability to reflect theologically. Poetry and poetic prose or any form of creative writing can be included here. There is no right or wrong. It can help us strengthen our faith by opening us up to different ways of expression. When we read the Psalms, we can agonise about the writer's discontent and rejoice with their praise-giving. But have you ever thought about writing a psalm yourself? As a form of expression, about whatever you want to, about wherever you are with God. This is the point where you may go, again, and come up with the excuse that you aren't artistic or you don't have time to be creative. But it's worth remembering. It's worth remembering that we do find time, as best we can, for theological reflection, and poetry or psalm writing can be just another form of that expression. It doesn't have to be shared, but it would be great if, as a result of this last exercise and this webinar, or the whole conference actually, if we could collate some of the writings, paintings and photographs that have come from our time together throughout the week and put them together in an ebook to send out and share with all the attendees as a source of ongoing inspiration to remember what we've learned and discovered. We've briefly explored a number of different ways to look at poetry during this workshop. Now it's your turn to have a go for yourself. So let's do a little activity to get those creative juices flowing. It all starts with being fully present in the moment, inhabiting the space and allowing the environment around you to inspire you. Sit quietly with your eyes closed so that you can hear any natural sounds such as the hum of electricity or voices floating in from outside the space. Listen for a few minutes. Now write down what you've heard. Listen for a few minutes more and add anything else that you've noticed. Next, turn your focus to what you can feel as you sit or stand where you are. Take time to mindfully explore what you can feel with your hands. The wall, the desk, the carpet under your feet, the chair's upholstery, the pen in your fingers. Feel the weight of your body in the chair and the curve of the chair back around you, for example. Are there places of discomfort? Moving on, what can you smell if you take in deep breaths in this space? Are there smells particular to this space, such as cooking from another room, a lingering perfume, books? Now open your eyes slowly and then take a little time to write about what you see. A favourite object or perhaps the way the sun or light casts shadows in the space. Don't think too much about what you're writing at first, just let the space around you guide your words. Write what you feel connected to or disconnected from. Let the form be free. Write what you feel, what you see, what you touch, what you smell, and what you hear. Let the form be free. To sum up, poetry can help us to self-reflect. It triggers the emotional centres of our brains. It stimulates our brains and gets us excited and inspired. It helps to expand our emotional vocabulary. Devotional poetry can help us pray, and we can share it. Find a poet or poetical style that you like. Keep a couple of poetry books handy on the bookshelf to dip in and out of as and when you have time. Try including it in your spiritual practice. Do some or all of the activities from this workshop. But mostly, it's about enjoyment.